All right. So thanks again for doing this. My first question to you is tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the mental health realm.
Yeah, so I am a licensed mental health counselor based in New York City. My journey began very differently than where I am now. So I began with a focus on forensic mental health counseling. I was working primarily in community mental health clinics where mandated clients, so people on parole and probation, navigating getting back into the community after incarceration. Many of them were also navigating the aftermath of committing crimes. So that gave me a very deep understanding of trauma and, the intersection of behavior and systemic challenges. So eventually I transitioned into my private practice where I found more of a niche working with like women, primarily those who are dealing with trauma, anxiety, kind of the general challenges that, millennial women deal with, such as people pleasing, which are often rooted, in those deeper traumatic experiences. So very passionate about creating a space where healing and transformation can happen.
hmm So what is your current role in the mental health realm? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so currently I'm the founder of Sacred Spaces Mental Health Counseling. It's a private practice where I help millennial women and therapists navigate their healing journeys. So my goal is to provide very kind of different transformative approaches, different approaches that are maybe a little bit more innovative and apart from the traditional talk therapies. So I practice something called EMDR, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was originally designated as very helpful for PTSD and trauma, but since has been, widely researched and studied and applied to a lot of different, issues. So I found that to be very helpful. I also recently am trained in ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So those approaches together have been really interesting and transformative for people. And I do sometimes work adjunctively with people. So sometimes therapists will work with a client who feels a little bit stuck, but they want to keep working together. The client can be referred to me, to do something like EMDR to work through a stuck point and then return to their primary therapist to continue that work. So I like to step in, short term sometimes, in addition to having my own clients.
hmm My next question is, now that you mentioned EMDR and ketamine therapy, how do those like, for my audience, how do those like differ or like, and how do those like overlap? Because a lot of people may not know a lot about, the methods and approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. So first I'll say where they overlap is there's still a level of therapeutic alliance between client and therapist that needs to be established. There's a degree of history taking and an understanding of the person's past experiences to why they were brought here today. So all of that like rapport building and history taking is still very important, as well as allowing clients to learn coping skills to regulate, not just through difficult moments in sessions, but between sessions. So I still, teach coping skills and meet people where they're at in that sense. Where they differ is EMDR is based on something called bilateral stimulation. So instead of just talking about an event, we put very focused attention on something I like to say, something that gets stuck and causes yuck. So maybe an unpleasant experience leading to something someone is struggling with present day. Let's say insecurities related to being bullied as a child or, having very abusive experiences. And instead of just talking about it, making meaning of it and finding ways to accept it, EMDR allows the brain to fully process and integrate the experience rather than it being so upsetting all the time. The person is then able to maybe think about it and remember it's there, but not feel that same, yuck in their bodies. So bilateral stimulation is the magic ingredient of EMDR. So that could be eye movements back and forth, tapping on both sides of the body, anything that involves both sides of the brain. Um, we think it has to do very similarly with the process of like rapid eye movement sleep. When we're sleeping, our eyes are moving back and forth, processing, integrating. So this allows people to really get to the root of issues in a way that doesn't require so much energy outside of sessions, practicing coping skills, having to reframe their negative thoughts. There's still a degree of that, of course, but the healing becomes a little more spontaneous when the whole brain is involved. So EMDR almost feels kind of like magic sometimes, like it moves really quickly and we really get to the root. And ketamine assisted psychotherapy, it's still being studied and researched, but slowly kind of becoming more and more talked about. Ketamine, I guess a really quick way of explaining what it does to the brain is it acts on certain receptors and makes the brain more neuroplastic for a point of time. So, neuroplasticity being the brain's ability to change and rewire and create new neural pathways. So, ketamine provides this really nice window of neuroplasticity during which time any therapy is actually more effective. The brain is more susceptible to adapting and changing in this nice neuroplastic window. So that's when I really like to do EMDR. As helpful as it is on its own, when it's combined with ketamine, it's a really great way to break through in a way that doesn't always require months and years of traditional therapy. So it's a little less talking, although, of course, there's still that establishment of trust and history. It feels like perhaps challenging the same way as talk therapy can be challenging, but you can see the results a little bit more quickly, a little bit more spontaneously, and that can be really encouraging for people who have spent a long time struggling.
Mm-hmm. My next question is in the sections that you work with your clients, what are some of the key themes that you notice when they come in and talk to you about their issues?
Yeah, so a lot of clients come in recovering from early childhood experiences, including having emotionally immature parents. So sometimes that looks like abuse and neglect, but other times it looks a little more subtle, like, you know, different ideas being communicated over periods of time corresponding to someone's self-worth or their ability to set boundaries. A lot of people first come to me in the role of being kind of a people pleaser, maybe the caretaker of their friends and family. And while a lot of the time they love to do that, it sort of leaves them neglecting themselves. So a lot of women, especially that I see, have trouble kind of prioritizing themselves and their needs the same way. So I like to help people maintain their values and like wanting to take care of their loved ones and still find a way to support themselves as well and to build their self-worth from a place of they're worthy simply because they exist and not because of what they do for other people. So it's really exciting when I see my clients starting to like put boundaries in place, maybe communicate a little more assertively about their needs, and um, ultimately still create better relationships. I think there's sometimes this fear of, if we change, if we start setting boundaries, if we assert our needs, we might be too much or a burden somehow. So I like to really try to challenge that idea and create empowerment instead.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what impact has doing this kind of work had not just on yourself, but also on the greater community, like, what, like, how does doing this kind of work help make a difference in people's people's lives? I know it's kind of a two-parter, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So individual healing has a ripple effect on collective healing. So like I said, many of my clients are working to overcome patterns rooted in experiences with intergenerational trauma or, emotionally immature parents. By creating a more confident, self-assured adult, we're building a collective experience where individuals can hold space not just for themselves and others. It's pretty amazing to see how one person's healing can shift their relationships, family dynamics, even their professional environments. It's really all connected. And I saw in my work starting out with, people who are primarily in therapy, not because they chose to be, but because, court mandated them to be, or it was a stipulation of parole. I noticed that a lot of them did not have that baseline level of support or that ability to speak up or set boundaries. So it came out, unfortunately, in destructive ways towards themselves and others. So it really does have a ripple effect. When we're creating more confident, resourced individuals, we're creating a collective attitude of healing and contribution.
Mm-hmm. I guess kind of like my last question is, what can people take away from this conversation? How can uh this mental health be sort of a way to really help these let me rephrase that. How can the mental health be used as a way to sort of destigmatize this notion of people with mental health, being bad or you know what I mean?
For sure, yeah. I think we still have some work to do there, but we're getting a little bit better. So I really think just by communicating and being open and being authentic sometimes means being very vulnerable, and you kind of can't have one without the other. So I think the more we try to project this idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time, the further away we get from really understanding what the human experience is supposed to be about. There's happiness is great, but it's one small emotion on the spectrum of the entire human experience. So when things feel like they're falling apart, when things feel messy or difficult, I think it's very important to recognize that as okay, we're still in our journey. This is still part of the journey. This is actually an inherent part of the journey. So instead of seeing it as bad or wrong, seeing it as it's just part of the human experience. Even if you want to look at the archetype of like the hero's journey, there's always challenges, there's always obstacles, and there's really no story beyond that. So I think that it's all about making the meaning, and the longer we try to put up this pretense of we're supposed to be okay and happy all the time, the further away we get from that human connection. So I think the more we stigmatize, the more we disconnect, and the more we approach with love and curiosity, the better we can feel about ourselves and others and hold space for those struggles instead of pathologizing them.
All right. Here, all right.